All right, Psalm 56, let's call this one, Cleanse Me of the Philistines, a familiar foe, as the title of this chapter is going to describe this as a psalm that David offered up, remembering or commemorating the time when the Philistines seized him in Gath. It's going to roughly follow that same pattern we mentioned where there's a who. Who is it? We've already answered that. The Philistines. How is David responding? Well, once again, he's leading off with a prayer in which he's going to ask what he wants God specifically to do in this psalm that starts off in verse 1 with the prayer, "Be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me." That's the who. "All day long an attacker oppresses me." And this is going to be another one of those psalms where the attacker is going to be described as an all-day enemy. But once again, he goes from describing what seems to be a singular enemy down to verses roughly 5 through 7, saying it's not really just one. All day long, verse 5, they injure my cause. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They stir up strife. They lurk. They watch my steps as they have waited for my life. For their crime will they escape, which leads to the what he's asking God to do. In wrath, cast down the peoples, O God. Why? Because as we've seen in previous Psalms, and actually in the previous Psalm, the typical characteristic of an enemy in a time when David's praying like this is verse 19 of the previous chapter, chapter 55, because they do not change. And so likewise, the Philistines were generally that kind of a persistent enemy that would not so much listen to reason, understanding that even though they were a persistent enemy, as we mentioned before, David even had Philistines in his own army and was able to establish peaceful relationships with at least one Philistine king while he was fleeing from Saul. But as it is sometimes said, notwithstanding the peace he was able to reach with some of the Philistines, he is asking God, or seems to be asking God, to put an end to the drama. And finally, for this week, how will David respond to his belief that God will actually help him out once again? Beginning around verse 10, we'll say, "In God, whose word I praise, in the Lord, whose word I praise. In God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me?" Well, my answer would be probably quite a bit, but it's a statement on the degree to which David is functioning at a level I just wish that I could get to, understanding that he is going to go on in the final few verses to say, "As for my part on that how, I know one thing I must do," verse 12 is, "I must perform my vows to you, O God. I will render thank offerings to you, for you have delivered my soul from death. Yes, my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of life." Understanding, as we've often said, there are times when things seem so miserable. It almost seems like we have nothing that we can do. But as we sometimes say, please, God, just as you help us reframe the issue to understand ways that we might be able to rejoice and actually find courage in a discouraging situation, likewise, help us understand things that we can productively do in a situation, even if they aren't moving the major obstacles in front of us. There's still some things that we can productively do. And that's what David seems to focus on when he talks about, as for me, I can still perform my vows, and that's what I'm going to focus on. We've talked about that before, but the thing that stood out to me in this chapter is the simple confession in verse 3, "When I am afraid." Understanding that David was a man who was known for his courage, and in times when you're known for being strong in a certain area, it can be super difficult to confess weakness in that area. But to the degree that David has tapped into the power of confession, he has tapped into, once again, a level of confidence that he doesn't have to manufacture. Understanding that Jesus himself said in a verse that's easy to overlook for its simplicity, one we've heard since we were a kid, "You will understand the truth, and the truth will set you free." God, deliver me from the times that I am too afraid to admit that I am afraid. Understanding that confessing my fears may be another way to access a level of confidence that I don't have to manufacture.